Right, colleagues, allow me to get started. We're a little over 4 o'clock, so we want to have a good discussion. And I must now certainly welcome you to this session of the Professional Learning Series 2023. We're kicking off with a new theme this week, namely around entrustable professional activities. Now, first up, I just want to note that in terms of the scheduling, we will have this session and next week's, and in a little bit about face, and that I do want to speak to a journal article next week around the technology around the development or the monitoring, the use and monitoring of entrustable professional activities, in line with our Tech Tuesday, which is the second Tuesday of the theme generally. The first is normally the Journal Club, but we're going to be looking particularly at an article around the technology that we'll share with you beforehand for you to have a look at, around the technology that can support us in the use of EPAs and the monitoring thereof. The third session, however, we have got some guests, courtesy of our Assistant Dean of Curriculum Development and Teaching and Learning, Dr. Carol Hartman, who is then going to step in for 2 sessions. And we just having some scheduling challenges with putting the third one in, which is a workshop that I want to dedicate to the writing and developing of an EPA, an entrustable professional activity. So I did just want to flag that to you, that there are these 2 sessions, and then we will then Dr. Hartman will step in with her guests, and then we'll return to the theme. I also want to flag for you a workshop that we'll be having on the 14th of July, which is a Friday afternoon, here at WITS, which is part of the national process. And that national process is part of it is that we're having dedicated workshops through at each of the universities, at each of the institutions, and WITS is the last on the list. So when the national team comes, of which I'll be a part, comes to engage with us around EPAs, there'll be a number of lessons learned from those workshops elsewhere, and then we can benefit from the best of the best workshops here at WITS. So just to flag that, and do look out for notifications around that, colleagues, around which we'll be sending out within the course of this week in terms of venue, time, exactly in terms of that workshop on the 14th. Okay, so allow me then to just note what we're looking to achieve out of this particular exercise today in this hour before 5 o'clock. And I've put 5 points in the chat, and I do want to just be able to focus on those. The reason being that I'd like us to have this clear engagement or clear objectives for our session today, is that I'm going to be jumping around quite a lot. And why I'm going to be jumping around is because of the platform that I want to share with you around entrustable professional activities. And that platform, or that platform is a particular course that is an international course that I would encourage anyone who's particularly interested in the development of EPAs to be engaging with. And so I'm going to give you a sense of that EPA EPA course, or and answers to these particular questions by moving around a little bit in that international course, to give you a sense of what is it all about. Allow me just to check my connection here, colleagues. Just if you give me 1 minute. Okay, I'm back again. Thank you for your patience with me. All right, so and because of that, because of us jumping around a little bit, I do want to just focus particularly on these. Remember, we'll come back to these 5 points. This session, we would like to focus on the fundamentals and the basics of entrustable professional activities, which is why I've chosen to speak to these 5 fairly clear particular points. where we're at in South Africa at the moment with the MMed Entrustable Professional Activities process. I'm going to give you a bit of a sense as to where we are at, in the sense of the move towards introducing EPAs as part of the core of the MMed training and assessment from 2025, originally planned for 2024, but now moved to 2025. Secondly, why is it that we're wanting to have an EPA approach within the context of the MMed? Thirdly, what is an EPA exactly? And what is it about it that we need to be focusing on particularly in order to not get off track, if I may put it that way? Can we look at entrustment scales and what do we mean by that? And then I want to spend a fair amount of time on what factors affect entrustment, colleagues, because really that ultimately is what we're all about with respect to entrustment professional activities. So the second session, as I said, will then focus on some of the technology that can assist us, and in the third, which is our learning workshop, traditionally, we'll be looking at the development of an entrustable professional activity, in particular, for how it is that we must why it is that we must use it early on, but then certainly as to what the steps are to develop an EPA and why do we need to do it. So allow me then just to set the scene for where we are at with the MMed process at the moment in South Africa. Now, the first point I'd like to make in this regard is that it is important that we recognize the different actors in the process at the moment, or in our national conversation. Critically, the first one that I want to mention are the disciplines, because ultimately this EPA development, implementation, monitoring process is a discipline-driven exercise. Pediatrics, for example, as a discipline in the Department of Pediatrics at WITS, will want to be in alignment with the development of EPAs within the context of departments elsewhere, but ultimately it's a discipline-driven process. Secondly, as I've alluded to, are the institutions, WITS, UP, Free State University, etc. And thirdly, then there's the national process. And we're grappling a little bit with how best the national process should be supporting the institutions to support the disciplines in that order, as I understand it, as I see it. And the national process itself is led by the South African Committee of Medical Deans, alongside the Colleges of Medicine of South Africa, in a joint exercise under a joint steering committee. And those individuals, the individuals of that steering committee have put together a number of actions and initiatives in support of the disciplines and institutions, respectively. The first is that there is a strategic plan that the National Steering Committee has put together in the development of these EPAs, and there are a number of work streams that are in place for to roll out this support for the EPA development and implementation. There are also particular workshops or engagements. We have had a series of what have been known as road shows, 3 of them, and now dedicated in-person workshops at each of the institutions to which any and all of the disciplines involved in MMed training can attend. And that, as I say, will culminate in the 14th of July with the workshop at WITS. The 4 streams that the EPA, that the National Steering Committee have been involved in, is firstly looking at the development of EPAs and what might be the process. How can we support that particular process? Secondly, the operationalizing of the EPAs, and that includes faculty development, looking at some of the systems in place that we need to have in terms of communication and the like across different institutions for the operationalization of the EPAs. The third is their technology, the third work stream, and we're looking at various technologies that can assist us with respect to the development and efficiencies and efficacy of implementation of EPAs. And lastly, looking at the MMed regulations itself for what it might mean to introduce EPAs into the MMed and what hoops we need to jump through from a regulatory perspective to be focusing on them and introducing this as the new stake in the ground, as it were, or the new focus within our MMed training. So that's really where we are at with respect to the national process that is currently in play. And I represent WITS on the National Steering Committee, joined by colleagues within other disciplines. Or other institutions and disciplines, should I say. From a discipline perspective, I want to draw a distinction between two different foci. The first of those that are somewhere along the process of developing EPAs as a common exercise for across their different institutions per discipline. ENT, for example, has made some good strides. Family medicine has made some good strides. Certainly anesthetics has similarly done so. And there are a number of different ones, but I must emphasize that different disciplines are at different places in that journey. And the second is the focus on the focus on those who have actually put in place as disciplines or institutions train the clinical trainer courses that can then be adapted to include the introduction of and the understanding of application of EPAs in that context. Family medicine as a discipline nationally has been running a train the clinical trainer course, for example, for some time. Over the last few years, developed in conjunction initially with the Royal College of General Practitioners in the United Kingdom, and now taken on a life of its own in our appropriately local context. So that's really where we are at with respect to the national institution and discipline space. But then that brings me back to my questions and that I've put in the chat, and in the context of this course that I like to introduce you to, that I'm going to now be sharing some tidbits from that course for us to engage around. So if you allow me just to share my screen. Okay, I'm going to keep my camera off, colleagues, so that you can see this. Christine, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
We can see it, Prof.
Thank you. So I want to raise this is the initial the home screen of the ins and outs of Entrustable Professional Activities and International course that is led under the expertise of Professor Ollie ten Cate, out of the Netherlands, specifically with an association of Utrecht, has an association with Utrecht and indeed Maastricht universities as well, that colleagues are participating in terms of the faculty on this course. There are 6 or 7 individuals who have given of their time to develop this course, internationally based, one of which is our own Professor Vanessa Birch, who is also operating within our colleges of medicine of South Africa setting to be able to provide expertise, technical guidance and expertise and support for the development of our own process, indeed on a national level. So there are a number of particular courses or modules to this course, and it is available for colleagues to attend on a number of occasions through the year. However, I must note that it's quite significantly oversubscribed, this particular course, but nevertheless we will share the dates and of the courses, and have colleagues attending. It does applying to attend. Excuse me. Does cost in the region, if I recall, when I did the course last year, in the region of around 3,000 Rand, 4,000 Rand, between 3,000 and 4,000 Rand to attend this particular course. It's in the evenings, for the timeline being favoring South Africa as in quite close to the Dutch time zones, and with a couple of sessions other than that. So it's mostly doable with respect to the South African times that are available for attendance on this course. So allow me then to then move to the just to share with you some of the key elements from this course that we're going to be using just to ask and answer the 4 points of clarity, or questions that I've asked and put in the chat. The first is well, why entrustable professional activities? And we really want to start up front with this as to why it is that we want to use entrustable professional activities. Now, really, the bottom line within this particular module on the course is that we're looking at competencies versus EPAs. So, colleagues, I want to just frame the understanding that when it comes to competency-based medical education, which has been in place for some time, we are focused on, for example, the knowledges, skills, and attitudes of our registrars in this context. That really looks at a training that is somewhat, if I may say, traditionally divorced from the authentic settings in which the registrars are expected to perform their units of professional practice. And so therefore there tends to be some challenges with the reliability and the validity of the assessments, and for them being very feasible on one side, yes, but challenges with the validity and reliability of those assessments, and the authenticity of them for not necessarily being linked into the workplace in which the registrars are working. So when it comes to the competency-based medical education, we've had this in place for some time, and there is a from the involvement in the distant past, but then of course it was around the CANMEDs that many of you will be familiar with, and then equivalent frameworks of competence, be it the ACGME or in the Doctors Tomorrow from the UK, that are using similar outcomes-based education that speaks to, such as professional communicator, collaborator, the central slide, scholar, health advocate, leader, around the central competency of the medical expert that you'll all be familiar with, or many of you, with respect to the CANMEDs framework that is used. And it is aimed at a standard level of proficiency for all graduates. And the critical features are that it provides a clear description of standards for a good physician. And indeed, coupled with that, assessment of all medical trainees using these standards, and competence, not time, is the primary reason to finalize training. Now, just a word on our current setup in the context of the WITS training platform. You'll recall that we have 5 or 6 academic health complexes, might we say, including our extended academic platform. And within, in particular, the Johannesburg Metro, we have a number of tertiary settings at which we are training specialists. Our registrars are present in those settings. And while it may be difficult, it may be possible to standardize the training is particularly difficult. And for the context of the training being, well, quite simply, very different in one place to another, for it being in completely different geographical settings. So then that begs the question, when we do have the clear description of standards for a good physician and specialist, how easily are we able to standardize the training towards becoming exactly that? And there's some challenges with that. And so therefore the more authentic, a method that might be more authentic in the context of a more workplace-based assessment may indeed be potentially more appropriate. Now, the question is always asked, would clinical educators trust all graduating trainees with their own family members as patients? And indeed, what the slide speaks to is that the failure to fail is a real challenge with many of our registrars. And why is this so? Well, the context is often that, and we'll come back to this with regards the factors affecting entrustment, is that there are many reasons for us failing to fail, often because it is a high stakes, not necessarily single, but often very few high stakes decisions or high stakes assessments that evaluate the competence of a particular trainee. And then there is this tendency to fail for whatever reasons. Rarely do we ask ourselves this very question, are we comfortable with our own families? If they were to be patients, would we entrust the graduating trainee to be able to treat our patients as family members? So I don't want to deal with all of these slides, colleagues, but what I do want to show you is that when it comes to the outcome-based competencies, progressive sequencing, tailored learning experience, competency-focused instructions, and programmatic assessment, our competency-based medical education is allowed to. There is a richness to the particular to CBME for it comprising these 4 core components. Now, I do want to draw your attention to the programmatic assessment in that essentially what we're looking to achieve there is to have multiple low-stakes assessments with feedback that allow a picture of the student's competence to be presented or to be built up and understood by the members who are by the consultants or the preceptors or those involved in the training. Critically, though, what the purpose of the introduction of EPAs is about is to bring that programmatic assessment from a workplace-based assessment perspective to couple with the focus on entrustable professional activities. So please just bear that in mind, colleagues. And when it does come to the gap between theory and clinical practice that we're needing to ensure, because of the challenges with focusing on knowledge, competency, and skills, it's not only theory, but there's a gap between the use of the competency-based model and aligning it with the authenticity of what is required within the context of clinical practice. Which is why, coming to the entrustable professional activities definition, we rather look not at competencies, but the units of professional practice that may be entrusted to a learner to execute unsupervised once he or she has demonstrated the required competence. So the shift of focus is from the individual competencies to the work that must be done. So in that sense, I want to frame it as one of our slides helps to articulate that if we look at on a time continuum, whereby we're starting at a certain point in the registrar's training, we're moving along, providing that student with training, and at various points along that continuum, we're essentially looking retrospectively to see as to whether the student has appropriately gained the knowledge, skills, and competencies within that period of time. Those knowledge, skills, and competencies remain absolutely vital for us to be able to assess, and that is essentially not lost. But the introduction of entrustable professional activities just changes the lens, colleagues, whereby we're not looking retrospectively on day 482 as to whether from day 1 to 482 they've attained the competence, but rather on day 482, when we happen to do when we've got a structured assessment, we're making, at that point, we are making an entrustment decision whether a registrar on day 483 can be entrusted to perform the units of professional practice that we have identified as the core curriculum. And that is fundamentally different to looking retrospectively at the competencies that the student has attained to date. One of the key ways in which it assists us is it bridges the gap between what one might call a traditionally academic exercise of training and assessment to one that really demands that we have a focus on the training and assessment in the workplace, A, and B, over time, B, and C, with the appropriate feedback on a regular basis, whereby we might then be able to have a really deep sense as to whether this registrar is entrustable to perform the units of professional practice in their setting. Now we'll get back to what we mean by the entrustable professional activity and how we can define that differently, colleagues, with respect to the categorization, if I may say, of entrustable professional activities. It remains in part similar to the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of competence-based medical education, certainly, but it can be defined around different lenses, or looked at through different lenses. But let me come back to that in a moment. So an EPA should be part of essential professional work in a given context, requiring adequate knowledge, skills, and attitudes. You see there, it's built into EPAs. It's not separate, or the competencies are not separate, but they're part and parcel of EPAs, leading to a recognized output of professional labor, usually confined to qualified personnel, independently executable, i.e. not a necessary part of another EPA. And the refinements of that, or the nuance of that, we will come back to in our third session when we go through the 8 steps to develop an EPA. And we have a template to look at that, and we'll work through that template in the developing of a simple EPA. Executable within a time frame, and observable and measurable in process and outcome, leading to a conclusion of well done or not well done, and reflect on one or more of the competencies to be acquired, which again is part and parcel of the template that allows us to develop the EPA and indeed assess the EPA appropriately. Now, this is a critical slide, colleagues, because I really think that for me, that this helped me a lot to just understand the key differences between competencies versus entrustable professional activities. First of all, competencies are person descriptors, whereas EPAs are work descriptors. Why? Because persons have or develop knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, whereas work comprises of units of professional practice. Therefore, going to the bottom, if I may, competencies are maybe the ability to do something successfully or efficient, but EPAs is something that is trusted to be done successfully or efficiently. Content expertise, health system knowledge, communication ability, management ability, professional attitude, scholarly skills are all, as colleagues, as you well know, considered part of the competency categories: knowledge, skills, attitudes, values. Whereas, if can you be trusted to discharge a patient? Can you be trusted to counsel a patient? Can you lead a family meeting? Can you design a treatment plan? Can you insert a central line? Can you resuscitate a patient? Units of professional practice, independent one from the other, done within a particular length or unit of time, but within a particular length of time, for being easily then defined within that context. Importantly, underneath, and as the template will demonstrate in our third session, underneath the or within the unentrustable professional activity, for example, to resuscitate a patient, and yes, we'll talk about the generalizability and the specificity of an EPA, but focusing on a simple resuscitation of a patient, there are integrated and multiple competencies within that one needs to be able to assess, but one is not inherently assessing the medical expertise or the collaboration that is shown or the communication that is shown or the professional competence in that EPA, but rather the entrustment to perform that EPA in resuscitating the patient, for which all of those competencies are key. And one sees that there will be multiple and holistic. There's a holistic framework approach that can be applied to the EPAs, and this is really what then gives rise to both the development of EPAs on the one side with respect to the competencies or the steps that need to be followed, but indeed as well with respect to the entrustment decision, which we're going to now come to in a minute. Competence is a stage in the development continuum, whereas an EPA is rather the ability to perform a unit of professional practice. Now, I do want to allow me then, having given you a sense of some of the slides in this particular module, can I pause for any questions before I come to the entrustment decision? Any comments or questions on what I've shared today, colleagues? Okay. Okay, so allow me then to move to the entrustment decision itself, and that's really in multiple parts, but I want to focus on the entrustment scale, and I want to focus on the difference between an ad hoc entrustment decision and a summative entrustment decision. And the reason I'm differentiating between those two is that an entrustment scale can be applied to both. But critically, the summative entrustment decision that essentially is a decision as to whether the exit outcomes, the competencies in order that the individual has appropriately, but for being able to be entrusted to perform that unit of professional practice, whether they have been developed appropriately, cannot be taken by one person in this model, and shouldn't be in competency-based medical education as well, should I please note for a moment. So the entrustment entrustment committee that can be formed is typically what needs to happen within the summative entrustment decision process, whereas a clinical preceptor may make ad hoc entrustment decisions around a particular individual registrar's performance around a unit of professional practice. So against that background, allow me then to go back to this international course and just share with you then some of the key points are, and examples of scales that are used for supervision and entrustment. Now, can I just note, interestingly, about Miller's pyramid? Many of you will have noted that you will know about Miller's pyramid, and to remind you of the knows how, shows how, does. And folk have argued that the EPA is really about the trust, which is at the pinnacle of that Miller's pyramid. The original article written by George Miller, introducing the Miller's pyramid, spent very little time articulating the appropriate measurement of the does at the pinnacle of that pyramid, as George Miller described it initially. Why? Because it's fairly difficult. Again, why? Because it has to be done within the context of the workplace. And that is a challenge, because we didn't have the tools at the time, nor the experience perhaps in medical education, and certainly not the technology or the systems to be able to appropriately, on a programmatic level, look at the competency of the registrar or the student who is being assessed. And I use competency deliberately there because we hadn't looked at the EPAs, of course, when the Miller's pyramid was first spoken to. But the entrustment decision-making that needs to be made essentially pivots around these 5 core levels of trust. Now, there are many others, and I'm going to show you 1 or 2 quite interesting examples of some quite complex entrustment scales. But ultimately, is this not, you will agree, the core 5? First of all, you will only trust a trainee to be present and observe, but has no permission to enact the EPA. So they can be present within a minor ops list in theatre as a unit of professional practice. The appropriate completion of a minor ops list, or involvement of, or choosing my verbs carefully, just to be able to conduct an ops list, minor ops list, would be a unit of professional practice as a function, and one would be able to either be present and observe or be entrusted to practice that EPA with direct or proactive supervision. Yes, practice that level EPA level with indirect reactive supervision. But is the threshold for a registrar that you may be provide unsupervised practice? You may be allowed, you'd be entrusted to have unsupervised practice. And certainly unsupervised practice is is the overarching, should I say, goal or entrustment that we need to, a level of entrustment that we need to give to a registrar for them to work as a consultant pediatrician and the like. Although, of course, level 5 is critical as well, is it not, colleagues, when one is looking at a consultant level. I must note 2 things here, if I may. Firstly, that we may be pitching a single EPA at level 2 for a 3rd-year registrar and level 4 for a final year registrar, or level 5 at a final year registrar. Alternatively, there may be 2 different EPAs that are both at level 4, but because of the complexity of that particular EPA, the one is at level year 2 registrar training, and the other is at level 4, at year 4, for example, to make that distinction. Observation, the direct proactive supervision, indirect reactive supervision, potentially around around a report or a write-up or an engagement, which is very learner-centered, I want to draw the attention to the colleagues in the NMFC team here who have been using with me and often under the good leadership of Dr. Ugowanyi, the difference between a mini CEX in this context, where there may be direct proactive supervision for having clerked a patient and observing the clerking of the patient or the examination thereof, whereas this is potentially more amenable to the snaps. This one is direct patient-centered as a mini CEX potentially. Yes, that is with the patient, and this is a particular skill that is being supervised here, of course, but and so the DOPS is more appropriate here, colleagues. But the mini CX and the DOPS is more appropriately around direct proactive supervision. Yes, you can present a mini CX or the findings thereof to a colleagues or a preceptor independent of the patient, but that then more sits. You need to be comfortable that this is then indirect supervision and there's a balance between the two. You would only move to this indirect reactive supervision, which is more learner-centered than patient-centered, potentially a little bit later on in their training. And then the oversight distance supervision, coupled with, lastly, the be a supervisor for juniors. Now, I want to just draw your attention, and you'll be able to look at these, and I will share these slides incidentally, and importantly, I will share these slides because they are expressly available for faculty development, and so we can engage further on these slides. But there have been the undergraduate education is also a possibility, and I do want to flag this because most of the work has been done around postgraduate supervision and postgraduate training programs. But there is currently quite a lot of work that's happening. Particularly, I'm involved in a focus group on the 22nd of June, in which we're going to be giving input to how the EPAs might be applicable in an undergraduate context. But look at this, colleagues. This is the Weller scale for anesthetic residents, which was devised in the United States. And see how they break it up into very practical considerations for at what level of entrustment there may be. Now, admittedly, one doesn't want to be too focused on breaking it down too much, but there's some impracticalities to that. But for example, let's distinguish between 3 and 2 in that you may be comfortable to leave the trainee to go on a coffee break. But as in 2, but comfortable staying out of theatre for lunch. That's how they distinguished in this context. So very practical considerations as to how one might look to have commonality of understanding in terms of what it means to entrust a registrar to enact a particular unit of professional practice. Now, there are many scales, and they all speak to this in ad hoc entrustment and/or the summative entrustment by the team decision by which clinical competency committee is the preferred vehicle by which a summative entrustment decision can be made. Okay, allow me to pause there. Are there any questions before I come to factors affecting entrustment, which is really where the rubber hits the road, in my view? To Mervyn.
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon to everybody. This is fascinating for me because what you are saying seems to attempt to define and quantify the kind of instinctive reactions we were brought up in. We had our seniors who would allow us to do something and not go for coffee, but allow us to do it, or allow us to go for coffee and call them if there was a problem. And so the impression that I get here is that we're trying to define this in measurable or quantifiable terms to make an equal evaluation. Is this an unreasonable assessment?
So, Mervyn, I must note that it's a very interesting question, because you're exactly right. I made in a workshop last week with the West Rand district team, the family medicine district team. I asked the district family physician, Dr. Wenigema, I said to him, if you were to put in the room 5 of your consultants, the senior nurse from the community health center at which the registrar has been working, the clinical manager of the same community health center, an advanced midwife who's been working with the registrar for a long time, would you be able to, in that room, at the end of 4 years of training, be able to collectively suggest that this registrar is ready for it to be qualified as a consultant? Yes or no? As just a ad hoc engagement. And the answer was a definitive yes. If the frameworks whereby they can understand the standardization are in place. In other words, there was a reluctance in the room on account of what might be happening elsewhere on the training platform, and indeed at the next CHC down the road. But for their collective knowledge and their entrustment of that registrar, would they be able to come to a decision? And the answer was also further qualified in that what would we think we could, definitively we could, but it might take us a long time because we would need to be on the same page around certain issues. Now that speaks to faculty development. And if we can get that faculty development right, and we can get the systems right, then it does give power it gives authority, it gives credibility, it gives clarity to the team-based concept of being able to assess whether a registrar is competent and can be trusted to do the job. And those are small decisions around that are made hundreds of times every day in our clinical spaces at the moment by our registrar, by our consultants, our preceptors, our midwives, our nursing staff, around the entrustability of a registrar. And how this exercise is nothing new in that sense, but it's trying to formalize, Mervyn, the process in a more that can stand up to a regulatory framework, that can stand up to standardization, that can stand up to or standard setting, should I say, and can be, but is flexible and agile enough that we don't necessarily need to standardize across all settings. And lastly, in just a few minutes, and I don't have time further, but I wanted to touch on the factors around an entrustment decision, because this is quite critical. And I do want to highlight one slide in particular on these slides, because this is where it's exciting, but there's some pitfalls. Is that there are currently challenges with workplace-based assessments, because that is what this is about. It's about building an understanding of the registrar's competence over time with feedback and trying to record that appropriately. Because at the moment, if we sit in a room and 5 people say, well, 10 people, 6 people, 5 people, however big the entrustment committee is, and decide if somebody's competent or not, there needs to be certain frameworks within which that decision is made, and it needs to be informed by reliable markers along the journey. And technology can help with this to capture the data as you go. But we want to look at the 5 the variable groups affecting ad hoc entrustment decisions, and the 5 learner features that affect task-specific trustworthiness. Failure to fail, I've spoken to as an issue. Generalizing from observing one feature is called a halo. And you'll agree that if you've had one interaction with a registrar that's been excellent, we need to be careful that you're going to pull your entire viewpoint of that registrar from that. It's difficult in the sense it's not really reproducible because it's in the workplace. So the context in which you're working changes all the time, and the patient changes, and the trainee changes, and the preceptor changes, and the context changes all the time. So it's difficult to reproduce in terms of those individual assessments, which is why we need so many. So the bumps in the road smooth out. The dove and the hawk, they're assessing the preceptor. If you've got a number of different assessments by doves and hawks, then they balance out. So there are a number of potential challenges to workplace-based assessment, as we found, haven't we, colleagues, those of us involved in both the GEMP program and the NMFC program at an undergraduate level, and the clinical associate program at an undergraduate level in the context of medicine. And forgive me focusing on that purely, colleagues, but that's the context in which I work. And we've had challenges with the reliability. We've had challenges with the observer rated differences, and often somebody will get 90% for the workplace-based assessment component and get 52 overall. This is a challenge. And this is always the case with Millard's pyramid, is that can be made very reliable at the bottom of the pyramid in your MCQs, colleagues. But at the top of the pyramid, it's difficult to meet the reliability requirements. Your OSCE, which is the third one along the line, can be made reliable if you have enough stations, etc. But it's not easy to necessarily do that. So we need better workplace-based assessment. And can the entrustment be an approach that improves it? This entrustment as opposed to evaluating competence. And this is your typical traditional workplace-based assessment. She's nice and works hard. It won't hurt her. It won't hurt and will probably motivate if I mark her a superior. Whereas on the clearly the trainee is, please mark me superior. And then are they going to be on top of their game with this much respected and highly competent consultant, but then when this young trainee is with your midwife or your intern or your community service doctor, that's a different level of respect, of engagement, of communication. So the entrustment decisions for health professionals combine the three particular acknowledgements of competence to act, which is ability. And that is traditionally what we're looking at in terms of our current assessments. Of readiness for privilege to act, which is their right, and you don't have to grant them that right. And then of readiness for service, which is duty. So furthermore, I want to come to one slide in particular, and there has been some good data that's been shared on this, and that the variance due to learner and rater has been improved with regards to entrustment supervision scales in the literature, as opposed to traditional scales. Because there is a whole new level of duty and service in particular, as opposed to just capability or ability, that comes into an entrustment decision by a supervisor, if we're thinking EPAs. A minor tweak, colleagues, but a significant one. But look, there are certain learner factors, trustworthiness, and the supervisor factors, propensity to trust. And I want to speak to those quickly because time doesn't allow me, but this is an important slide. Factors affecting ad hoc entrustment decisions. Shall I trust this learner to provide care to this patient? And we want to be looking, so if Dr. Ugawanye on this call is looking at whether self-evaluating, and indeed amongst her team, evaluating at whether we can make entrustment decisions we have to be conscious of the 5 learner factors for entrustment, which I'm going to come to in the next slide. So leave that alone for the moment. The clinical experience, clinical ability, trust propensity, and supervisory experience, top right of the supervisor. The task, difficulty of the task, and the risks involved. Supervisor-learner relationship, like-mindedness, duration of acquaintance, and interpersonal culture. And you do want to have a decent mix, because you need to be careful that the duration of the acquaintance has been either very short, or indeed the ability to be unbiased and impartial is then affected. And perhaps most critically, this on the context on the left, performing a cesarean section at 2 o'clock in the morning as a unit of professional practice is very different to performing that unit of professional practice at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And these factors have to be brought in to the ad hoc entrustment decisions. But allow me to focus on this one, and I'm going to perhaps close on this because it's 5 o'clock. And then it will just allow us to situate some questions for us collectively to look at. Not only do we need to make an entrustment decision, colleagues, but critically, we need to make a rich entrustment decision. And this speaks to this speaks to being able to and literally see if the registrar has agency. Are they proactive towards the work, towards the team, towards the safety of patients and staff? And do they have agency around personal development? Let me move to C for a moment, because those are the classic knowledge, skills, experience, situational awareness. Those are the classics that we're always looking to assess. And they may be the most brilliant diagnostician with respect to the management of common infectious diseases that present at district health, in district health settings commonly, which may be an entrustment, or maybe a unit of professional practice and therefore an EPA. But does the same registrar have the integrity? Are they truthful, patient-centered? Are they reliable in turning up to the community health center, the district health center, the regional center, conscientiously, predictably, accountably, and responsibly? I, integrity. C is the capabilities, but do they have, and this for me is the big one, do they have the H of humility to recognize their limits, ask for help, and be receptive to feedback? Yes or no? Do they need more work on it? And I leave you with this thought before we close, and that is that the ability to entrust a registrar, albeit and potentially an undergraduate student in the future, in the workplace, around the trustworthiness of being able to perform appropriately to the level of competence expected, a unit of professional practice is not only a matter of capability, but is a matter of those professionalism concepts. And I draw your attention back to the previous theme that we engaged in around both starting off with academic integrity that Marika Clayton took us through, but secondly, what Tina Ingrata and myself, under her good leadership, admittedly, of course, around the professionalism. And are we able to bring in a culture? Can EPAs help us with bringing in a culture of professionalism around integrity, humility, reliability, for example, amongst others? Because if we can develop the vehicles and essentially the communication tools and the engagement and the frameworks within the context of entrustment committees, for us to be able to elevate those professionalism characteristics to their rightful place would we be able to improve the culture of professionalism? And in addition to that, I ask you, would it impact on our role modeling of the very same? Can I sit in an entrustment committee with my hand on my heart and deliberate on the capability of a registrar in the context of reliability, humility, integrity? And can I put hand on heart and say that I should be part of that entrustment decision if I don't rank myself, and I've reflected deeply on my own levels of integrity, reliability, humility. And I put it to you that we don't have enough of those characteristics, those professionalism characteristics in our health system at the moment. And amidst many of the thousands, hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers that do demonstrate that, we don't have enough, I'd suggest. And are the EPAs a way in which we can potentially improve upon that? A question for you to go home with. And I thank you very much for your attendance. It's 5 past. I'm mindful that we don't have much time to engage. I want to say this very clearly, is that two final points. And one is that this applies very much to other disciplines colleagues. The MMed in the SOCM space is moving forward with this. There may be some work that's being done in the others that I'm not familiar with in therapeutic sciences and oral health sciences, etc. But we look forward to potentially having more of a collective discussion around this. In fact, the oral health sciences is very much part of our national agenda, and we need to be pulling you more into that debate, for those colleagues on the call. And I remind you again that next week we will do the technology engagement, or enabling that. And secondly, we will look to a learning workshop around the development of EPAs at a date to be announced in July. But I bring to your attention finally the 14th of July, Friday afternoon, at which there will be an in-person workshop of EPAs. And I ask for your good attention to the upcoming announcement later this week about that particular engagement. Colleagues, I thank you for your time very much.